My name is Dave Anderson, and today I want to talk to you about accelerating towards serverless-first with the Value Flywheel effect. Thanks for coming to the talk. I really appreciate it. I'm an architect, a GP, globalization partner, so I'm actually a practicing architect, so I practice what I preach. So really, serverless-first, I want to kind of preempt by saying there's a lot of interest around cloud migration, but for me, the big incoming wave of disruption is actually modernization. And that's the thing that I see on the horizon for many organizations. It's like we've moved to the cloud, we've got the cloud socks, we've done all that. How do I modernize my stack now that we're actually off-prem? And for me, the answer is the serverless mindset. And I'll get into that as we go. What's my experience in this? I worked with Liberty Mutual for many years, and when I was a director of technology there, like a CTO role, we started the journey in 2013, and I was lucky enough to be at the table when we started speaking with AWS about kind of moving a lot of our workloads. There's a couple of really fundamental principles that we put in place, that we used AWS as a partner, so not just a cloud vendor, a partner. We had this idea of serverless-first code as liability, and part of my team, we kind of drove this messaging. How can we get our engineers to write less code? I think more about the capability and get that as cheaply and as efficient as we can. Build well. How do we build in really good building sort of quality controls? And how do we give teams the autonomy to move fast? And I call this the second transformation, the modernization piece. And I wrote some of this up as a case study before I moved on from Liberty. And I captured a lot of these kind of thinking. I kind of had a model that I used called the Value Flywheel, and really had this idea of how do we join business and technology. I spoke to the presence of the business who were saying, like, I don't want to hear the word Lambda or AWS. I don't care about any of that. Just how can we go fast and go safely and at decent cost? That was it. So we come up with this idea of how do we have a nice kind of flywheel effect, how we join these things together. It's just kind of talking through these. The first is that idea of Wardley Mapping. In my team, what we did with myself and architects, we used Wardley Mapping as a way to create perspective. How could we assess and make sense of the landscape? Then we had this idea of clarity of purpose. A lot of teams were building, but they didn't know why. Leaders would say, we need to hit certain KPIs or kind of North Stars, and the teams were completely unaware of that. So how do we create a common clarity of purpose? The idea of challenge. How do you create an environment within the teams that people are happy to say, why are we building this? Is this really the metric that matters? There's a better way to do this. How to create that environment of kind of challenge? Serverless first. Once you get that idea of clarity of where you're going, how can we make developers build really quickly and at quality? So that idea of the serverless first kind of strategy. And then finding long-term value. How do we ensure we're not just making quick builds, that we can build things and throw away? We want sustainable practice. So this is kind of coined as the Value Flywheel effect. We've captured this in the book, the Value Flywheel effect, that just came out there on IT Revolution about just before Christmas. I wrote with my two co-authors, Mark McCann and Mike O'Reilly, and the three of us are now architects at GP, kind of practicing that same model. And it's really about, the book is really about how do you accelerate your organization towards the modern cloud. And today I want to kind of share some key learnings about those kind of 5 phases and give you some takeaways. But first I want to kind of hit something that's been sort of popular, the recent Twitter storm of serverless-first, around kind of Prime Video. It seems like every 6 weeks there's a Twitter storm where someone is kind of declaring a technology is dead or technology is alive. And the thing about serverless-first, it's not serverless only. People think it's Lambda or nothing. I'd be the first to say that if your technology strategy is use Lambda, then you're not doing it right. You are not doing it right. And I mean, it's like, I thought this was funny, only a Sith deals in absolutes. Like, ask any architect over the past couple of decades, should I use technology X? The answer is always, it depends. Where do we lose that kind of that perspective? It depends what problem you're solving. If you're running on-demand video with millions of subscribers, Lambda's not probably a good option. And that was a very well-written article by kind of the Prime Video team. If you really want to hear about that serverless-first kind of assessment of that article, I would go and read Adrian Cockcroft's article on Medium, where he breaks it down. What serverless-first is using the cloud provider managed services to build quickly at quality. And then you're in that evolutionary architecture state where you can make choices as you move forward. There's a nice saying about don't Don't build yourself a one-way door. Always make technology choices that you can pivot away from. That idea of evolution is really important. It kind of challenges me when architects say, this is the only way we'll do it, and we're going to bake ourselves in the corner, and that's us. That's not a responsible way to behave, I think, for your business. So I would think of that serverless-first as being a starting point, not the only place you need to get to. So I want to hit on each of these kind of 5 areas. First, I'll hit on Wardley Mapping. And really, for me, the question is, how did a couple of engineers sitting in Belfast kind of influence a Fortune 100 company? And the answer was Wardley Mapping. We were able to sit and assess the landscape and decide what were the best moves to make. Like with any transformation or big technology drive, there's like 100 things that you could do. What's the thing that you should do to really make a difference? And if you haven't heard of Wardley Mapping, I would definitely look it up. There's a bunch of stuff in the book about it, but I want to kind of give an illustration. So what's the role of the architect in this? And this is a really scrappy map that myself and a few of the team drew probably maybe 8 years ago. We're trying to assess the landscape. Maps are ugly. They're not correct. They're just something that you kind of throw up. It helps a team align on a way of thinking. For me, what the architect often did here was facilitate. The architect would maybe say, well, what happens if this technology evolves? Or what happens if there is an inertia point here where we can't evolve that? Ask leading questions and find out what's the really important thing to do. You'll spot weak areas. We have a key area of our business is in custom build, held together with sticky tape. Let's address that. Let's focus on the right areas and align on the right thing to do. And I think a nice thing about mapping, which is often kind of hidden, it's alignment and collective. You're deciding what's the best effort to go forward. A really nice way to illustrate this is this map here, and this kind of sits very well with Patrick's talk this morning about ChatGPT. I was trying to think what's the best way, and I'll kind of talk through this. The way you read a Wardley map is you usually kind of start at the bottom and work your way up. And if you haven't seen this technique, it's by Simon Wardley, the researcher. The visibility is on the y-axis here, where things at the top are more visible, things at the bottom are less visible. And there's an evolutionary axis from left to right. We've got Genesis, something brand new, never been seen before. Custom, we kind of know how to build it, but we're not quite sure. Product, this thing is now in demand. And commodity, it's just this thing exists, and that's that. ChatGPT kind of exploded on social media around the start of February, and I'm like many of us, I'm probably the same. You're on the edge of AI. You deal with it, you understand it, but you're not a specialist. So ChatGPT exploded, and about 6 weeks later, this guy Mark Craddock, put this map out on Twitter, and within a minute, I was able to say, right, I can see through the ChatGPT kind of Twitter storm, and I can see what's important. And I'll just quickly annotate this map. The bottom right here, he's got things that are invisible and commoditized, OpenAI, LLMs, API, and cloud. And there's a value chain that ends at tools. This tells me that the tool sets are mostly commoditized. These things have been within people like Facebook, Google for many years. We are now just accessing it. So building a better tool for ChatGPT is not a good avenue to go down. There's a more interesting value chain up the middle, which has got VectorDB, text splitter, embedding, vector, prompt templates, QA, prompt techniques. Right, prompt engineer, what is that? That's interesting. I can now see that the focus that I need as a sort of consumer of ChatGPT, think about what's the prompt techniques and then what is this prompt engineering field to start to come about. Within a minute of seeing this on Twitter, I was able to kind of see through all the activity around ChatGPT and think, right, that's where I need to focus. So that's the bit that's evolving. Even some of these pipelines around embedding, VectorDB, Pinecone, I mean, these are things that will evolve. Like someone else will look after that. I can focus my time, be high up the value chain, and really leverage ChatGPT. That's the power of something like Wardley Mapping. You can sense make these very complex technical areas. And I would follow Mark on Twitter. He's got a bunch of really brilliant maps and a lot of really great kind of prototypes. But for me, that's the power of mapping. You can straight away see the sense of a very complicated kind of environment. So the next kind of phase is that clarity of purpose. And one of the things that I did quite a lot, and Mark McCann, one of the co-authors, does this quite a lot, is use this North Star framework from Amplitude to try and ask teams what is their North Star, what is the metric that matters. So you would say, like, what's the North Star metric for this team? Say number of deploys. Well, that's good, but it's not the North Star of us as an organization. You'll figure out something. If you're Spotify, it could be minutes of music listened to. So there's a North Star metric. There's mid to long-term impacts. Where will that get us to? Then there's input metrics, which could be breadth, frequency, and then there's the work to try and drive this. It's a little like kind of impact mapping. And what you're starting to do there is find out who are the users, what are the needs, what's the scope. You're starting to ask questions about the work that we're doing, and you're getting a good picture. And this is a great way of distilling down a piece of work and having something nice and clear. And you're probably thinking, should the product manager do that? That's not my job as an engineer. And again, that's the wrong idea. We are the business. You want to be sitting down this as a team, product, engineering, legal, whoever else. Let's figure out what we're all working towards and agree on a North Star metric. And it's not to say the other metrics aren't important. I mean, you still want to think about your uptime, time to market, etc. But as engineers, we often obsess over the things on the right. They outweigh the thing on the left, which is the business goal. And I mean, for most of our kind of leaders, the stuff on the right is table stakes. It's the stuff on the left is the thing that we really want to talk about. So it's just about finding that balance. And again, a brilliant example of this, I thought, was this is a sketch from Simon Wardley. He met the Cloud Guru team at the cloud training company that's been acquired by Pluralsoft. He met them at an event in 2017, and they were doing a lot of serverless events. And they said, Simon, this mapping thing seems interesting. And he says, can you do one? And literally in the green room at a conference like this, he scribbled out this map and basically mapped out their entire company strategy. And they realized that they were focusing too much on the community, on conferences and other things, and they needed to focus on their learners and engineer. So they effectively pivoted their model and just created focus. And I've spoken to a few of the leaders in Cloud Guru, and they were since acquired for, I think, $2 billion, and helped them just focus. Just a simple, basically, napkin sketch, just to say, there are some things evolving, but you need to focus on your user need, which is your developer who's looking to learn. So something like that. There's a proper case study in the book about how they did that. The next one is like kind of challenge, and I think this is really important. I mean, remote work has completely changed the environment as we work. The idea that you can come into the office, like a team is a bunch of people who sit in that bay, that's been blown apart by remote working. So it's really a very different kind of environment. The things that bind us together in the physical location may not exist in the remote location. So we need to think differently about what that looks like. And I always think the system is more than the code. There's that socio-technical aspect. There's, how do your engineers work within each other? How do they work with other teams? Do they understand where they are in the technology system as well as the organizational system? There's a whole bunch of things there that maybe were implicit when you're physical, but they're now quite explicit when you're kind of remote. And this is really very straightforward. If you haven't already, I would certainly look at team topologies as a way of thinking about teams and technology. I was joking with a friend a few weeks ago, saying that when was team topologies published? It was like 4 years ago or 5 years ago. It's been such a new idea. So don't assume everyone understands what this is. It would take the time to explain team topologies and these systems to other peers in your organization, because getting that right is absolutely priceless. And that creates that nice environment where you have enabling constraints, where you're thinking about what are the things that are absolutely must-dos. If you've got a team API, it must be correct. Maybe there are certain ways that teams go to production. Maybe there's a build it, own it, run it. Whatever those constraints are to keep your teams operating. I don't know how many teams that I would talk to and they'd say, yeah, we're a stream team and we're building a platform and we're helping other teams. And you're like, okay. So I think that idea of putting enabling constraints in your organization will help your teams move quickly. A brilliant example is from a startup called WorkGrid, where the CTO, Gillian McCann, had probably the best enabling constraint. And really that idea of inviting challenge into the organization. As a CTO, their technical strategy is really simple. If you've got an idea, let's talk it out as a team. So any idea is value, but we all know what our enabling constraints are from a technology perspective. Let's just evolve quickly. No big process, just let's fire that up. It's the best way to introduce that challenge, to give people that ownership and empowerment. So from a serverless-first perspective, that next best action, I think for me this is really this is such an important concept, and I've seen there was a nice slide in the previous talk about that shared responsibility model. AWS of this shared responsibility model, we talk about the cloud, and you often see companies that migrate will move to the AWS infrastructure. They maybe have separate availability zones for kind of DR. They might have edge locations for enhanced performance. Like, that's a really powerful move, and there's loads of value in that move. But I would describe that as your basic cloud migration. But now you're trading AWS as a data center. Now, in fairness, you probably just have a really nice data center run by some really professional people, but you still effectively have a data center elsewhere. To really leverage the power of the modern cloud, you need to lift that value line. Now, what can your cloud provider do around kind of compute, storage, database, encryption, platform management? I mean, really, and this is the same. It's not just for AWS. It's also for Google, Azure, whoever. Can your cloud provider be your platform team? And then you focus on what do you want to build on top of that. I think helping teams move up that kind of line, I think, is really powerful. They really move at speed. And one of the things about Serverless-First is that it's not understood too much, is it's effectively an operational construct. Like, oftentimes when you say the word serverless, people just think of Lambda. There's a nice kind of spectrum here. On the left, you've got more operations, things like for compute, you've got a virtual machine, you've got MySQL on-prem, storage on-prem, EBS, Hadoop on-prem on the right. You've got on-prem systems, lots of operational overhead that you own and run. On the right here, you have things that are completely abstracted away behind a service, like Lambda, DynamoDB, S3, step functions, even EventBridge. These are things that basically they're an API call away. So what I would often say to teams is start on the right. Don't think you need to start on the left and slowly evolve to the right. Start on the right, and if something happens, like if you're using Lambda and the compute, it's not fast enough or your throughput's quite high, fall back at the Fargate or managed containers. It's okay to fall back, but start on the right. You see people installing massive kind of very complex solutions, and they're kind of locked into high operational overhead. So, I mean, you've got to think of Serverless-First as an operational construct and not just as a single service. And really I was asked the question a few months ago, and really since the books came out, I've been speaking to lots of different companies and leaders about some of these concepts. And one of the things I keep getting asked about, what's the impact? If we go Serverless-First, what's the impact on our teams and engineers? What are the things that are now different that traditionally weren't? So I get this kind of list, and there's definitely something around your engineers need to be really close to cloud principles, not just the ability to deploy something in the cloud. They really need to understand what are the true kind of cloud native principles. And even in leadership, your leaders also need to understand those as well. I think system designers, event-driven architecture, that becomes really important, that people can think in systems and not just in low-level components. There's also a commercial piece of it. We talked about FinOps. You need to be really aware of cost and value. Your build cost, run cost, and value delivered. They are now paramount that engineers understand what those are. I think there's something around learning, teaming, and interteaming. Those interpersonal skills of your engineers. You need that growth mindset. And I would say, nod to Dave Farley. I know it's not an IT revolution book, but the Modern Software Engineer is a brilliant book to describe some of these concepts. And Dave Farley's been doing brilliant work on describing what this new norm looks like. There's a bunch of really solid principles, like, build it, run it, own it, rapid feedback loops. A lot of things we've been talking about in the DevOps kind of movement. So really to kind of illustrate that, surprise, surprise, I put together a kind of quick map. And really what I'm thinking about it is if you're a VP of engineer or like a technology leader, probably your main need is of a high-performing team. That's the thing that you want in your organization. Now, the first probably dependency there is technical skills. You want good technical skills. Now, often people will stop here. If I hire a bunch of really smart technical people, a high-performing team, but there's more to it than that. Technical skills, you might have cloud expertise or system designer. And that's the first thing you often interview for, the first thing you'll test in a team. I would say the next dependency is interpersonal. You want people who can work well within the team and also interface well with other teams. I always think it's a really bad sign if a team is fighting with another team. That shows a lack of maturity in engineers. You want a growth mindset, that people aren't afraid to tackle new technologies, new problems. After interpersonal, you've got commercial thinking. You want people being value aligned to what we're trying to do as an organization. You want people to be aware of the run cost, the build cost. You don't want people refactoring something to save $10 when it's costing like 10 grand to do the refactoring. And really there's something about empirical evidence. You don't want people doing work based on gut feel or I think this would be good. You want to be data driven. And then from commercial thinking, you've got modern software engineering. This is things like build it, run it, evolution architectures. And for me, the two things that I'd be looking to evolve to the right, I think modern software engineering, I'd be looking to make sure the teams understand those modern software engineering principles, and also that idea of commercial thinking, that they understand the value. You kind of evolve those two bottom dependencies across, and the tech skills you've got. So for me, that's a nice kind of map of how you could potentially map out some of your engineering skills in your organization and make sure you're moving the right ones. Again, a map like that helps me and my peers talk about where do we need to focus on as we grow the organization. Again, I thought this was a really nice talk by Werner Vogel, the CTO of Amazon, at reInvent last year. He did a piece on event-driven and the world being event-driven. So a couple of nice videos. And for me, when you get to this idea of modern cloud, this modern software engineering, everything becomes event-driven. That's the path we go down. It's more async than synchronous. And so what does that mean for the role of an architect or technology leader? Like I say, I'm now a practicing architect in GP and globalization partners. What I found is the architects are more of an enablement function. The architects, they're not sitting in team, drawing UML diagrams or trying to, code things for the team. What you're really doing is you're facilitating thinking and making sure the teams are moving on. We see lots of event storming, that we're sitting down trying to figure out what does this landscape look like. Let's try and explore and find the things that we don't know. And Alberto Brandolini's got some great stuff on how you do event storming. I mean, if you're old, you realize it's just fancy BPM, but we'll call it event storming for now. But it's a brilliant facilitated collaborative technique. The North Star exercise is something we will actually sit and do with groups of people, with cross-functional teams. What are we trying to achieve? Let's map this out, usually on Miro or something, and let's figure out what is the metrics that matter. When you start to get into some of the EDA, the event-driven concepts, you use something like EventBridge as your event backbone. You start to get into the principles of eventing design, bounded context, domains, a lot of domain-driven design, a lot of principles around building a large distributed system that's built to scale. And then finally, example mapping. You want to use behavior-driven development and example mapping to make sure the teams understand what are the right behaviors they're trying to build. So again, that's a very different picture of an architect maybe 10 to 15 years ago with what you're doing. The technical complexity is still there, but you're trying to offload some or help the teams get through that themselves and help them think bigger. So for me, what you're trying to do really there in this serverless-first organization is ensure the engineers have high agency with low barriers. The system you're building, the platform, has got low barriers so we can move fast, but the teams are empowered to move quickly so that you're trying to remove any kind of gates and any kind of friction. Okay, so for the last kind of phase, this idea of long-term value, what I would call a problem prevention mindset. How can we remove problems before they happen? The hero engineer who just went in and sat on support all weekend and fixed something, that's brilliant. But the question is, well, how could we have stopped that before it brought down production all weekend? So there's two areas here that I want to talk about, SCARP and engineering excellence. And SCARP is an acronym we use for well-architected, which I'll cover in a second, and the idea of engineering excellence. But what kind of combines the two of these is this concept, the four disciplines of execution, or 4DX. This is a model by, I think, Steve Covey came out a few years ago. It's about a way to help teams empower themselves to create their own kind of directions, almost like empowerment. And I found this to be a brilliant model. There's 4 stages. First, the discipline of focus. Work with the team to make sure they have widely important goals. You send the team, what do you need to fix? What's important for you? Second, the discipline of leverage. Work on lead measures, not lag measures. Try and help the team identify lead measures, which is very consistent with the North Star framework. What are the lead measures we need to focus on here? Third, the discipline of engagement. Use a compelling scoreboard or scorecard. That's really just a way for the team to visualize something. When we first started doing this, we had very fancy scorecards or scoreboards. We've really simplified it now. It's effectively a confidence page with a bunch of tables. It's as simple as you can get. The simple the scoreboard, the better, because that empowers people to change it. It's not a bunch of fancy graphs or nothing. And the fourth is the discipline of accountability. There's a cadence of accountability. What we often do with some of these things is at the end of every sprint, every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks, we'll check in and review these stats. The important thing about these metrics is we always focus on the trend. We don't compare teams. There's no such thing as one team being better than another team. You look at a team and look at their trend over the past couple of months and see if they're trending in the right direction. It's quite straightforward. So first of all, for SCORP and well-architected, we use the AWS well-architected framework, which has got 6 pillars. You see them there: operational excellence, security, reliability, performance, cost, and sustainability. Each of these pillars usually has about 12 questions, and each question is a bunch of best practices. So what we'll try and do is we'll maybe focus on something like reliability, and we'll dive into what the team are doing around what's their best practices around DR, about resiliency, about maybe chaos testing, things like that. We'll look at outages, recovery times, things like that. So this is a framework that we can define. What do we mean by good architecture? In the past, I've heard people say, well, architecture to me is, no, architecture is a thing. We very strictly have defined that these 6 things are what we mean by good architecture. So what we kind of ask the teams to do for the SCORP process, and again, the single dashboard contains a whole bunch of tables, which at the top will have business metrics, which are things that are specific to that value stream. And then the SCORP is actually the acronym for the 5 key pillars. Now, we haven't added in sustainability yet. We're kind of getting there. But it's really about security. What are the threats and mitigations? What about your threat models? What have we seen? What vulnerabilities are open? Let's kind of just track some numbers month to month. Cost. What's the cost per component, per cloud service? Where are your big costs? What have you improved? Operational excellence. Usually that's the DORA metrics, deploy frequency, change, MTTR, etc. Reliability. What incidents have happened and what was the recovery like? And then performance. Are we seeing errors, maybe ingestion stats, processing times? And then finally, if we do a deep dive on the well-architected review, are there any big findings we've found? So having that in a simple wiki page where we just ask the team to drive that, well, we want to focus on performance because that's where we think we need to, okay, just let the team drive it. And I always think of SCORP as it's been like kind of, once you educate the teams on what this is, it's a bit like eating fresh fruit and veg, like your 5 a day. It's just what works. You know what I mean? You know what's good and what's not good. You let the team decide and kind of drive the conversation. The second thing that I've got there is engineering excellence. Again, we found a thing where people would say, well, what's good software engineering? It depends. One of the things that I was able to do, and again, it's covered in the book, is take Dan Pink's drive about motivation and this idea of mastery, autonomy, and sense of purpose, and kind of tweak that slightly. Well, mastery is technical mastery. How good are the skills within the team? Autonomy, are the team functioning well, that they can move quickly with minimal friction? And customer obsession, are they very clear on what those North Star things are? And usually for a team that are kind of high-performing, they'll be focused on customer obsession because they've got the other 2 kind of nailed. A brand new team might have to start with technical mastery. Maybe they need to lift their cloud skills. Maybe there's some serverless kind of learning they need to do. They need to kind of get to that. This kind of arrow shows that kind of evolution through this. And ideally, or usually, you'll have many teams on very different stages. But this is what I would use for our concept of engineering excellence. And again, we do a similar thing with engineering excellence, that we dashboard some of these things and we celebrate the improvements that the team have made using this 40X. So for long-term value, having organization-wide kind of definitions of by good architecture, we mean SCORP, and that's what that is. And by engineering excellence, we have a very specific idea of what these things are. A nice example, one of the examples in the case studies in the book is this idea at BBC. One of the things that people often say, well, serverless is fine, but it doesn't run at scale. There's a brilliant case study in the book around the BBC News team have completely deployed that solution using serverless technology, and they have some absolutely eye-watering requests, like 2.3 billion requests served in the month, 3.3 billion serverless functions invoked. They've 171 releases during the month. I mean, these are some fantastic, and anybody who is familiar with the BBC, when there's a spike in news, that thing is absolutely hammered. And the team have said that the performance is way beyond anything they've ever had before. So, some of these techniques, they do work, but you need to kind of put these things together. So kind of getting a summary, I've kind of tried to put these 5 practices around that idea of creating an atomic habit around Wardley Mapping, kind of learn the shape of Wardley Mapping and how you can use that within your team to kind of sense make. Be very clear on North Star and try and use that technique or something similar to align those business and technology kind of goals. Look at the social technical picture. I've got much more than that, but really I would start with team topologies. Don't be afraid to explain team topologies to your peers. Don't assume that it's understood. Lean into serverless-first as a concept, as a mindset. It's not about blindly using Lambda. There's a whole different approach there that I would call the modern cloud. And then create a heartbeat within your organization around engineering quality, either engineering excellence and a good architecture practice. People often, and that's kind of some of the key messages that I've got in this working model of the value flywheel. And the idea of the flywheel is that once this starts to turn, you can keep that turning. It's not something through once. You continue through this kind of cycle of improvement. People often say, is serverless must be easier. There's less things you have to do. It's higher up the value chain. There may be less things you need to do from a technology perspective around, fine-tune virtual machines, etc. But there's a wider scope of responsibility. So I would say it's not easier, but it's better. Gillian McCann, the CJ worker, has been famously saying this for years. It's not easier, but it's better. When you create that high-performance team, you give them ownership, empowerment, and responsibility, but you also need to give them a platform where they can move very fast and at speed and quality. So that's pretty much me. The book has been out since Christmas. We have a blog there called The Serverless Age, where myself and two co-authors will create some content. We also have a podcast, Serverless Crack, which it's a bit lighthearted. And give us a follow. And the help I would need from this event is, as we move into modern cloud and serverless-first, I'm really interested to hear about that kind of modernization journey. Where are you at in that modernization journey? What are the kind of, I would say, the obstacles? What are the inertia points that you're starting to deal with? I think there's a broader discussion to be had around how, as a community, we overcome these. I think the DevOps mindset and approach is absolutely perfect for where we're going, but there's we're starting to move up the value chain, and I think there's some different techniques we need to apply. So I'm really interested to hear what are your opportunities, challenge, and learnings from that modernization journey. Thank you.